Kaori, Araki. I am from here, Japan. Well, welcome to Japan. I am at University of Hyogo, which is about 2 hours by boat train from here, the west part of Japan. And today I would like to talk about perfectionism in football. It says football, but I mainly talk about perfectionism in rugby football and sports in general as well. I would like to share something about what is perfectionism in general and what is perfectionism in sports. There must be something different out there. Differences between positive and negative perfectionism. People use different wordings like adaptive, maladaptive, but I just simply make it simple, and I want to use the wordings of positive and negative here today. A little bit about how to cope with negative perfectionism. I would like to share from the research findings and some textbooks out there, and as well as my own experiences as a consultant in sports psychology. Okay, do you have a perfect life? Do you have a perfect marriage? My husband I don't live with my husband, not because of we don't get along well, because of our duties. We work at different universities. So I live in Himeji, and he lives in Tokyo. I don't think it's perfect marriage because we don't live together, but people say it's perfect. So we'll see what is perfect. Clinical psychologists say that perfectionism has two core concepts, which is setting high standards, sometimes too high goals and standards, and the other one is always worry about making mistakes. And can cover so many things about here, but perfectionism has been shown related to depression, anxiety, eating disorder, something very negative. The research about perfectionism in clinical psychology or educational psychology has been developed last 20 years. The reason why is that two groups of researchers doing great research out there in clinical psych and educational psych or social psych area. They both developed a questionnaire and titled the same, multidimensional perfection scale. We call it as a MPS, we took MPS. Those two, first group is Frost, so we call it as FMPS. They came out 7 subscales with 35 items, and they tried to explain their perfectionism as setting high personal standards, too high sometimes. Concern about mistakes is you always worry about making mistakes in your life. Doubt of actions, you always doubt about your own actions or behavior. Organization is well known that making things neat, put things straight, organize really well. Sometimes you check your pocket if you have keys and wallet in the bag, constantly checking. Sometimes you go back to the home and check your door if you lock at the house. So those things are organization. 2 subscales in terms of more of developmental subscales, which is parental criticism and expectation. They try to assess how their parents criticize them or expect them. The other one by Hewitt and Follett, we call it H because HMPS. They also came up with the same name of a scale, multidimensional perfectionism scale. They have 45 items with 3 subscales. This is a bit different because they are trying to explain perfectionism as you want it to be perfect, and you want other person to be perfect. You expect other to be perfect. The third one, socially prescribed perfectionism, is that your own perception of how other people think that they want you to be perfect. So there are so many social interactions out here to explain perfectionism, interpersonal aspects here. This is only parents in the concept, so interpersonal meaning was a little bit lack of interpersonal aspect here. The problem with the scales is that they are trying to think that perfectionism as a personal trait, which means you are born with it and doesn't change much wherever you go or whatever you do, or even though you have age, doesn't change much. It also came out from the clinical psychology area, so they tend to assess something very negative in your life, only negative things in your life. Therefore, it limited to assess both something positive and negative in terms of perfectionism. As I mentioned earlier, FMPS is mentioned about something about introversion aspect is lacking. So people try to use HMPS sometimes. It depends on their research interest. And also, many research shown that it's very hard to find clear 6 factors by using FMPS. And also sometimes reliability of the HMPS, especially other-oriented perfectionism subscale, doesn't come up really well. So they have some problems. But the major problems here is that researcher has been thinking that perfectionism is a global personal trait. This is a problem. We wanted to apply this to sports, and when we apply this to sports, there's a great example of this. David Beckham, great soccer player. He is diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, which is being too anal, too much organization in his life. And his wife is mentioned about everything has to match in the house. If there are 3 cans of Diet Pepsi, it will throw one way because it's uneven. So it's a little bit too much. However, I don't think he has been applying this trait to the pitch when he plays soccer. Being very successful means that he doesn't maybe have a way to cope with something negative perfectionism, or on the pitch, this trait won't come out. So now I'd like to show something about what is going on in sports in terms of perfectionism. About 15 years ago, they have found, clinical psychologists found that athletes may have positive tendency in terms of perfectionism compared to normal population or clinical population. It's very important for us to understand that sports psychology, we are not trying to diagnose athletes. They are not mentally ill, but we wanted to help them to perform well. So we should be treating athletes as mentally ill, something wrong with their head or mental. And other group of researchers is saying that perfectionism could be perfectionistic striving or unhealthy perfectionist. I would like to mention about this as positive and negative. So research is out there that athletes might be different. A little bit more specifically, athletes showing that there's a positive relationship between perfectionism and higher self-esteem and achievement goal orientation. You can already talk about it. And it is not orthogonal, but task orientation tend to relate to positive perfectionism. Task orientation again is a little bit more focused on what you're doing in the process and doing the right thing for yourself. Try to improve your techniques and skills. Goal orientation is more of outperforming others or focus on too much on winning. Those might be related to negative perfectionism. Those are findings so far in sports psychology research area. At the same time, sports psychology research has been developed based on the clinical psychology area. So many researchers have been finding that negative trait, which is perfectionism among athletes, could be related to higher anxiety level or the result of burnout. But problem here is, as you can see, relationship between perfectionism and some characteristics in sports that could be positive and negative. But all of the research, they have been using both FMPS or HMPS to assess personality traits or only negative characteristic of the psychological aspect. So, especially task equal burnout, mix of positive and negative, related to high personal standards, means both related to negative and positive. So high personal standards should be core concept of perfectionism, however, cannot separate between positive and negative. So this has been referred to by many, has been mentioned by many researchers out there. So you probably need better scales to assess perfectionism among athletes in the sports domain. And this is a part of my dissertation project, doctoral dissertation project. I develop and validate a sports perfectionism scale. You may already notice that there's not a clear definition out there in terms of perfectionism or perfectionism in sports. In order to develop the scale, I need to clarify what is about perfectionism. So this is what I came out based on previous literature. Perfectionism in sports is a tendency. It's not a personal trait, but more of a little bit more of a tendency. Changes based on the situation or whatever you do, education or art or sports, you may have a tendency to set high standards for the self and or performance you do, accompanied by pursuit of the faultless performance, not making mistakes in your sports. I came out with the 38 items up. I started with 81 items, and they end up, because of the so many steps, end up with 38 items. You should be able to assess positive and negative, and because of the time constraint, I will not mention about it, but you should be able to assess both intra-aspect and interpersonal aspect of perfectionism. Since I was in the US, this scale was developed in English by American athletes. I'd like to share 4 subscales came out. You should be able to assess positive with high personal standards, which is similar, very similar to other scales, setting high self-performance standard or goals. The other one is expectation from others, how a person's perception of that other, like coaches or teammates, set high standards for them is an expectation from others. Negative perfectionism should be able to assess with discrepancy, which is different from other scale, because you can't differentiate either negative or positive with setting just high or too high personal standards. So I put the perception of inability to meet the standard you set for yourself. So you set standard right here, I want to do this, I want to be able to make a team, and you shouldn't. If you can make it, there's a gap between those. So those are discrepancy. This is similar to others. This always came out as negative perfectionism, which is fear of making mistakes, negative feelings about making mistakes during performance. It's not very specific to training or competition, just in general in sports domain. With this scale, I am trying to find what is going on among Japanese rugby football players right now. This is my third year in Japan, and I'm just starting a new project right here. I want to share a little bit about the project I'm carrying on right now. I'm trying to not really develop, but validate the SPS, which I made in English, and translate it to Japanese. But it's not simply translating. You have to consider about culture and what is going on in Japanese rugby football players. And I also wanted to apply this to all athletes in Japan, not only rugby football players. But here's the data I want to share. It's only about rugby football players in Japan. Of course, the language I used was Japanese.